Former Prime Minister Najib hasn't answered one very important question, which is the role of his wife, Rosmah Mansor, in facilitating the 1MDB scandal. He's throwing a lot of people under the bus, but will he dare to throw her under the bus or not? Hey guys, welcome back to the Are We OK podcast, where we talk about public policies and politics in ways that are relevant to you, our loyal listeners and subscribers. Peter, almost more than 28,000 already. Supporting
that's right.
Mr. Money and also Mr. Botak.
That's right. Yeah. So just to let you guys know, right, we have actually checked the stats and we realized that many of you guys who actually watch Are We OK actually did not subscribe to the show. And time to time when I go to the mall, people actually ask us, they say, hey, how many episodes you all make in a month? Because they don't see any updates. So just to let you know, actually we update every week. But what happened is that because of the YouTube algorithm, you actually have to turn on the notification button if you want to get latest update.
Yep.
So go and subscribe, and you see the bell down there. Go and turn on the notification so that whenever there's a new episode, it will pop up in your newsfeed.
Yeah, and we hope to be able to get to maybe 30,000 subscribers by the end of the month. This is November already. But before we go into today's hot topics, Peter, welcome back. 2 weeks out of action.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, one day conjunctivitis, and then last week you were not feeling so well.
Lost my voice.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now you're back to normal already?
Now I'm back to normal. No more sore throat. I was on 2 weeks of antibiotics. Yeah, different kind of antibiotics, and finally back in action.
Yeah, so we just had Deepavali holidays. Happy Deepavali to all our Hindu friends. And any highlights? What did you do?
So I went to Desaru for a quick holiday. Yeah, with my family. Had a lot of fun there. Get to see Johor a bit. Can see it's a growing
Singaporeans or
town.
not?
A lot of Singaporean.
Okay.
I have to say the food there also, you can taste is very catered to Singaporean. Okay. Yeah, less salt, healthier. And I had an interesting incident. So I went to the golf course and the monkey stole my wallet and my kaki. So for about half an hour, I was stranded there in the golf course because I had to retrieve my kaki.
How did you get it back from the monkey? Because there's so many of them.
So the staff helped me. They threw a stick at the monkey, and then in the end the monkey just dropped the key. What about yourself? How was your holiday?
Very quiet. Just stay at home, do some work, catch up on some sleep, just relaxing and chill. So, Peter, one of the hot topics that has been discussed by many people but not by us during these 2 weeks is the first topic of discussion for today, which is the apology, not apology, sorry, I'm not sorry, by former Prime Minister Dato Sri Najib Tun Razak, otherwise known as Bosku. So this was an apology that he issued through a statement that was read out by his son on the 24th of October. When you first heard of this apology and maybe read some of the details and also some of the responses, what was your own personal take?
For me, it was a little bit late to say sorry, but okay, I just take it as okay, you're sorry. But I feel like it's a little bit too late to say sorry because maybe I've been very influenced by looking at international media. Like, for example, if you see in Japan, when something similar happened, even before it turned into any form of court case, the Prime Minister would have apologized.
Resign.
Yeah, so I feel like it's a little bit too late.
Okay, I will share my own response later for this segment. But I thought it would be interesting for us to go through the responses to his apology by various leaders and also influencers.
Yeah, actually that one is what caught my attention even more. Because the way they responded to it, I was like, wow, you got so many things to think about it. Yeah, and it also unveiled some of the concerns that usually I won't have and showed me a different side of how people think.
So let's start with, of course, the most important, or rather the person who responded, who is the most influential political figure in Malaysia, none other than our Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, who said he accepted the apology. And later on, I think a couple of days later, when he had some feedback on his apology, he actually said, defended his apology by saying that, I'm the father of the country, saya bapa negara. So if let's say somebody apologizes, we should take that in good faith and accept the apology, So his response was, what else can I do? Should I reject the apology and say that maybe the apology is not relevant, like what Anthony Look said? But in your opinion, do you think it's okay or it's even necessary for the Prime Minister to accept Najib's apology?
I think that for me, when initially I hear it, I was like, okay. I didn't give much thought to it. It was just okay, but what, right? Now, however, after that, I did listen to Keluar Sekejap podcast on this matter, and he elaborated on the Malay culture, on how when you accept an apology, it shows some sort of gracefulness in the Malay culture. And after listening to that, to their interpretation of it, I felt like, wow, that was a very smart move. Yeah, he did a smart move by accepting the apology and highlighted one part of it, which is actually many more other people are also responsible for this 1MDB case, but the burden currently only falls on one person. Yeah, so by kind of like accepting it, yet diverting the whole thing to another side of it. So I thought that was quite a smart move.
Since you brought up Keluar Sekejap, specifically, I think Khairi's response was to highlight that particular point, that as Prime Minister, you have to understand the Malay culture, and the Malay culture is one that's more forgiving, more accepting. And he contrasted PM's response of acceptance to Anthony Loke's response, whereby Anthony Loke, in a quite terse fashion, basically said the apology is irrelevant because he has been charged in court. His court case is ongoing. The current ones, there are few related to the 1MDB case. So to Anthony Loke, his response is not relevant. And then Khairi criticized Anthony for that by saying that it is not consistent with the kind of Malay culture.
Yeah.
Right. So my response to these few responses is the following. Firstly, all three of them responding to the apology by responding to their own crowd, because PMX is responding largely to the Malay crowd. Khairi, in his Keluar Sekejap podcast, is also largely responding to the Malay crowd. For Anthony Loke, his response is much more targeted towards the non-Malay crowd and also PH supporters, some of whom may be Malays, that campaign for PH on the basis of wanting to unveil, take down Najib over the 1MDB scandal.
Yep.
Right. So in that light, you can understand where each of them are coming from. But for me, I just wanted to add a little bit of a disagreement that I have here with Khairi. Because Khairi said that the Malay culture is one that's forgiving and all that, which is true. But in his own Instagram post or poll, he asked people whether they accepted the Najib's apology or not. And he found that about 50% of the people accepted, another 50% didn't accept.
51 and then 49.
Yes,
yeah.
so it's still a very divisive issue. Right? And I would say that maybe, of course, we don't know what is the composition or the profile of the different respondents. But I would say that even among the Malay crowd, as forgiving as the Malay culture is, many of them would still want Najib to be held accountable for the 1MDB related scandal and also the debts. On this, I would not agree with Khairi to say that this kind of apology would be acceptable to all of the Malays. And I want to explain this in a little bit more detail. Because if you read the actual apology itself, right, which is quite interesting, it was issued in English, right, which meant that Najib not only wanted to reach a domestic crowd, but maybe an international crowd as well. Things that he said, for example, and I quote, "First and foremost, it pains me every day to know that the 1MDB debacle happened under my watch as Minister of Finance and Prime Minister. For that, I would like to apologize unreservedly to the Malaysian people." And then he went on to say, "The recent court hearings and conviction of Petro-Saudi executives in the Switzerland courts, as well as the recent article by The Edge, based on their analysis of the case as well as internal Petro-Saudi emails in their possession, again proves that I am not the mastermind and did not collaborate with Jolo in deceiving 1MDB of its funds." Right? So he goes on and so on and so forth. And then finally he said, I have already been punished politically, but as I am clearly not the mastermind and neither did I collaborate with Jolo as recent events have shown, I should not be victimized legally too. I am still in deep shock knowing now the extent of the wretched and unconscionable shenanigans and illegal things that happen in 1MDB. Right? So, to me, this one is apology, not apology.
Yeah.
I want to highlight this, re-emphasize what I said in the past before when I was highlighting some of the extracts on the Edge 30th anniversary publication, focusing specifically on 1MDB. And it's not only the Edge book, it's also another book recently called The Siege Within that was published and written by a former Edge journalist, former Straits Times journalist as well, called Leslie Lopez, who basically documented some of the systemic problems within the Malaysian system. And also, he highlighted his own role in exposing the 1MDB scandal and also the role that Najib had played in it together with Jolo. Right. So it's something that I think most people who know anything about the 1MDB case would not be able to walk away believing that Najib did not conspire or was in cahoots with Jolo. Right.
So I think to respond to that, right, recently it's not just The Age that actually came out and said something about it, right? And then in the book by The Age, right, Tong Kwe Ong actually said that he actually met him up and then told him that, you got to throw Jolo under the bus, right?
Yes.
Because we know what's he doing. Kari Jamaluddin in his podcast, Kalau Sekejap, say he did the same thing. And if you listen to Tan Sri Nazir Razak, also he did the same thing.
Yes,
So
I read through his book recently, What's in a Name?
So there were 3 persons who actually came out publicly and said that they warned him about it. They told him these are the evidence that we have gathered, but yet he did not take action. Now, my personal thought is very simple, right? If you already knew about it, or you can say that, you don't see that as enough evidence. The least that you could have done is to commission an
Investigation.
an investigation. Even that wasn't done. But instead, you work alongside to shut the mouths of other people who are trying to speak up.
Including sacking your Deputy Prime Minister.
That's right. Yeah.
Tan
So
Sri Muhyiddin.
you can say that you don't know what's happening, but that is a very conscious decision of not wanting to find out what's happening.
Correct.
That's as good as a case where if, let's say, your partner is a serial killer and you kind of get hints about it, but instead of, warning other victims and also do something about it, you choose to silent other people up and let the case continue to fester and more people die because of it.
Here is where I want to bring in another point, which all the responses actually didn't touch on for various reasons, which is former Prime Minister Najib hasn't answered one very important question to me, which is relevant, which is the role of his wife, Rosmah Mansor, in facilitating the 1MDB scandal.
That has been something that has gone silent for a very long time.
So the reason why this is relevant, right, is because I think the different reports, including Tom Wright and Bradley Hope's book, Billion Dollar Whale, shows that Najib got to know Jolo through Rosmah, right? Because Jolo knew how to capture Rosmah's heart by arranging for all these celebrity engagements and things like that, right? So could it have been the case that Najib was protecting Jolo when he was Prime Minister because of possible instigations by Rosmah, right? And I think this is something that needs to be discussed because Rosmah also has been convicted of corruption.
Yep.
This is another case, involving Jepak solar contract in Sarawak and whatnot, right? And I think this is probably something that Najib has to come clean on as well, right? As part and parcel of the so-called rehabilitation process, right? He's throwing a lot of people under the bus, but this person, Rosmah, will he dare to throw her under the bus or not?
This
Right?
one is another story. So here's where I think, like, in terms of response when they say that Anthony gave, right? This is my thought of it, right? Was that I think I understand where is he coming from when Khairi said that in the Malay culture, you tend to just accept that apology. But again, he did mention one thing also. Accepting doesn't mean forgiven and that you don't have to do your term.
Your penance, yes.
Yeah, you still have to do your penance, right? Yeah. And I think that is the general majority, in my opinion. I think that's probably the general consensus out there. Now, however, will I use the word accept his apology if I am in that situation?
Saya menerima.
Yeah, especially
permohonan maaf.
if I am in a position where I'm
Of
a minister
influence, yeah.
of influence, right? I was thinking very hard about it. I think I still wouldn't say accept. The reason being is because the way the statement is being written. And it ended with point number 8 to say that I deeply regret, however, being held legally responsible for things that I did not initiate or knowingly enable is unfair to me. And I hope and pray that the judicial process will in the end prove my innocence. Now, if this sentence was written as, I deeply regret and I did allow this to happen because I knowingly and I bear full responsible and I'm sincerely sorry, I would have said, I accept.
Okay.
Yeah.
But this one is saying that I'm innocent.
Correct. Yeah. So it's almost like you wrote the whole thing just to say sorry because you are someone of power and you rarely say sorry, so that sorry sound very big. But like you say, it's a sorry, I'm not sorry. I'm sorry, but I'm actually innocent.
So in that case, And I would use Kyrie's words, here. Wouldn't it have been better for Prime Minister to say, kita ambil maklum. We take note of his apology. Kita ambil maklum permintaan maaf ini, dan kita ada penuh keyakinan dalam proses kehakiman. We have full confidence in the judicial process, and we let the judicial process take its course. That would have been a little bit better of a balance, right?
I agree with that. However, here's where I want to ask you the question back, right? Because as a politician, how important is it to be sensitive to culture in that sense? Like what Kyrie said. Because that point that he revealed there about the cultural sensitivity part is where I, as a normal citizen, who is not so much involved in politics and even in business, it's more about factually right and wrong, and so all right. It's less about pleasing. The pleasing part comes in, but maybe not to the extent. I'm not sure. So what do you think about that? Because like you say, I thought it was a smart move when he explained and say that when our PMX, because he also wants to gain the support of Najib sympathizer, so to say that I accept it and repoint it to other people as well, it's also a very smart political move, right? So what are your thoughts on this? And Anthony in his speech, when he just straight away outright, don't know whether did he say or newspaper just use it as the number one headline, it's irrelevant like that.
No, I listened to his interview that was given because somebody asked him about it, and I think he was consciously wanting to say something about this. So he said, to me, it is not relevant. Right? He said it as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it's just like how you ask me and then I answer you.
Yes, it was also sending a political message.
Yeah. So should it be considered insensitive then? So
here's where I don't think so.
I have that dilemma,
I don't think so, because I think Anthony is talking to a different crowd. Different audience. But at the same time, I would say that on PMX side, if let's say he wanted to remain more objective and neutral, and in a way still be sensitive to the Malay culture, he could have said what I said just now. Kita ambil maklum. We take note. It's a very neutral way of responding, but also, a very sort of like official way of responding.
Right.
Kita ambil maklum, you say a lot in, let's say, official meetings. We take note. So it's neither here nor there, which means that you don't try to piss off your supporters on the PH side, or you don't try to maybe also appeal too much to Bosco supporters, because actually, like I said, and like the poll that Kyrie did show, is a 50-50 crowd.
Right.
But I sense that in a lot of things that the PM is doing now, he tends to be more instinctive towards wanting to reach out to UMNO supporters.
Yes.
Bosco supporters.
Yes,
not just in this
that.
instance, but other instances
Can
as
see
well.
that.
Right? Because I think for him, his impression is that the PH supporters in the past will still continue to support the Madani government because the alternative is too scary, right? So he can only gain, he won't lose, by trying to reach out to Malay Bosco sympathizers. Right? So I think that is the kind of approach that he's using. Yeah.
So at that level, if let's say there's a better way of, is there any better way of responding? Like if let's say it's you, will you also just use the word?
I would say ambil maklum.
Ambil maklum.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I know that this is a very polarizing issue. And if let's say I was in a PM's position, I would be more neutral about this issue.
I see.
But maybe just one last final point to note, or line of questioning to sort of like pursue. What do you think will happen to Najib after this?
My thought,
your thought,
I'm guessing, let history play out and we'll see.
Yes.
House arrest. I got a feeling it's house arrest. My instinct, when I look at how things has been progressing so far, at one point, there was a lot of loud noises. It's very repolarizing in the sense the voice of opposition to say, hey, Najib should serve his term, and stuff like that was very loud. Eventually, we can see the ruling government tend to back down in their voices of that. They try to sweep it under the rug. On a personal level, some try to voice out a little bit, but it starts to reduce. There can only be two reasons this is happening. They are laying down the ground for something. It's general, right? Like in the management level, at the political level,
you're preparing
something.
Okay.
It cannot be so well coordinated one, because it takes effort. If there's nothing ahead, you will just let it run its course. You only want to create a ground for something. Now, so what's that something? Later, then we start hearing about house arrest. Then we start seeing like apology statements like this. My suspicion, eventually it will play out to be a house arrest. The question is,
What kind of time frame are we talking about here? 1 year, 2 year, 3 years?
I wouldn't know. If I can get that right, that would be great. But I would say that maybe 40% of his sentence will be at home. Lah.
Okay.
That's what I would suspect. Lah.
Okay, my take is quite different from yours. I would say that it is not in the interest of Anwar and even Zahid to be under house arrest. Because if he's under house arrest, he can receive people, he can have access to computers, phones and stuff like that. And that would put a risk in terms of disrupting the relationship between PH and UMNO. Because Najib, when he's out, even under house arrest, he may be able to undermine the power and position of Zahid. He's the only person who can do it right now. So that's one reason. Second reason is Najib's SRC 1MDB trial and all that hasn't been concluded. The statement that he used, that he issued, the apology, non-apology, was about 5 days before the judge had to make a decision whether the defense needed to submit their defense, whether or not there was a prima facie case for these SRC-related transactions that went into his bank account. This is the second set of charges. There's still some 1MDB-related charges that is not over yet, right? So until and unless all of these things get through, and the house arrest sort of like regulatory update or bill hasn't been passed yet, there's no guarantee that those things will move towards a direction where the government will feel comfortable to put Najib in house arrest.
Right.
So I think it is in the interest of Zahid and Anwar to continue to dangle the possible carrot until the next election comes, or is closer to the next election.
Right.
To say that we've done our best, we tried our best, but because of X, Y, and Z, our hands were tied.
Okay. Then
we'll see what happens. Maybe after a year.
I'm convinced at this as well. Then
we'll see, because the current SRC case, I think it will conclude sometime next year in terms of whether he's convicted or not. And I think if Najib is convicted, it will be another part and parcel of the process of really demoralizing him. Whether or not it will push him to even come out with a more quote-unquote sincere apology, I think that remains to be seen.
What about other people that were involved in this 1MDB case? Because one thing that was true that was being said by our Prime Minister was, it seems like all the responsibility is placed upon Najib alone. What about the governance and all these other things?
Yeah, so we're talking about maybe the former CEO, and then after that the CEO that came to take over. Later on, there were directors as well, and there were bankers.
Yep.
Right? So one individual, his name is Roger Ng from Goldman Sachs. He has been convicted and put in jail. Of course, his boss, Tim Leisner, and was made a witness by the US government. He threw Roger Ng under the bus, and he managed to get a plea. We have another person involved, Jasmine Lu.
Yep.
Who is now a government witness, and she's also trying to have some sort of a plea agreement, right? So, there are other people who are in this ecosystem, but insofar as going to jail, as far as I can remember, it is Najib in Malaysia, is Roger Ng. It is also the two individuals in Petro Saudi, Patrick Mahoney and also Tariq Obaid, who have been convicted and are in jail in Switzerland.
Right.
So there are people, other people who have been, punished. But, in terms of doing jail time in Malaysia, so far, it is only Najib.
So don't you think that there should be some Malaysian official that kind of like corroborated, right? Yeah, should take responsibility as well?
Yes, but of course, I think when PH 1.0 took over power in 2018, I think the focus was definitely on Najib because he is the big fish. The others were maybe not so important. I think there are still some civil cases that are outstanding against Aro Kandasamy, the CEO of former CEO of 1MDB. So I think that's still ongoing. I think there's also another case that's ongoing against the former KSP. This is the Treasury Secretary General, Tan Sri Irwan Siriga. But that case is ongoing here. There's not been any conviction yet, right? So he's not done any jail time as far as I know. So yeah, we'll wait and see to see who are the others that are involved in this ecosystem.
Right.
Because the other big fish is, of course, Jolo.
So I have one more last question I want to ask you, right? When it comes to this kind of thing in a policy structure manner, less of the current case, but rather a policy structure manner. One of the main reason 1MDB happened is there are a lot of people, definitely including Najib, who kind of knows what's happening but choose to stay silent. Now, he took one step further to protect it. There are also a lot of other people who took a different degree of action to protect this. Because it's such a big case, it has to be a
some
group,
civil servants
right?
and others that were, bankers and so on and so forth.
And Najib is the one that is being penalized legally for this. Do you think that generally a policy should be done or laws should be drafted up in such a manner where people who also do not whistleblow it, but rather take a step further to protect it, should also be charged, right? Which I think that this is kind of like
Actually, I think the current law allows for that already.
Right.
Meaning, if let's say you go in an active manner to protect certain wrongdoers, you're exercising your power. Whether in the position as the KSP or even influential people in the Bank Negara ecosystem that allowed those transactions for the money to be sent out, overseas. This good star, $681 million, right? If the system wants to go after these people with sufficient proof, that's enough already.
Yeah.
I also say that because of the precedent that 1MDB has set, right? I think anyone who sees any similar kind of scandal on this magnitude, whether it's Bank Negara, Securities Commission, bankers, civil servants, I don't think they would dare to, allow this to happen on their watch. But maybe some other smaller cases, harder to say. Right. So watch this space and then we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Are We OK podcast for this second segment of this episode, which is the revelation in Parliament after a question was asked by my good friend Yeo Bee Yin, MP for Puchong, about PNB and Khazanah's investment in Fashion Valet, where it was revealed that they lost 47 million ringgit after their initial 2018 investment. Peter, I'm not very, well acquainted with the fashion ecosystem. Of course, I've heard about Fashion Valet, the founders, and also some of their brands. But you are much more in the know about these kinds of things, right? When you first heard this news, what was your initial thought?
It's been a long-standing story in the startup circle where a lot of people will feel that Fashion Valet is not that great of a company that deserves the kind of attention that it deserves.
And not deserving of that kind of funding as well.
That kind of funding, because there are other better players in the market that could have been a better choice. But again, this is, it's kind of like a business thing. It's nothing.
It's an investment decision.
It's an investment decision, right? So actually the shock for me was MACC stepping in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, just to clarify to our listeners, as far as I understand, Fashion Valet is sort of like a e-commerce platform.
So, Fashion Valet is a company that started by this blogger influencer who's called Vivi Yusof, or Datin Vivi Yusof, more well known as. So, what happens is that they actually sell headscarves online. Now, for those of you who are in the fashion business and the e-com business, you'll know the headscarf business is super high profit margin because most of it is made in China, and the profit margin you are looking at anywhere at least 50%. Okay, basically whatever that you see online now that you can buy on Shopee, generally most of the time it all started with 50% margin most of the time. Okay, and that's the minimal. Actually, generally any e-com, the gross margin is at least 50.
Especially for these kinds of high value products.
And branded goods like Fashion Valet kind of headscarf definitely is way more than 50. You will be looking at, let's say, cost of like acquisition of a piece of cloth, say 1 ringgit, you at least must sell it at, say, 2 ringgit. Because we haven't included sales, haven't included packaging, everything. So, it's a high margin business, good money. So that's how it built up. And after a while, it's set up, they were selling it online. So it's one of the first early days e-commerce kind of player. And then after that, they managed to secured many VC funding, and they sit in the right place because it was during those time, or not during those time, but generally Malaysia have a very strong agenda for startups owned by Bumi Putra. So she also sit in the right place, so she got a good amount of funding. Now, definitely, there are other similar players. If you actually look at it, like, for example, Siti Khadijah but took a more traditional approach. But Fashion Valet, after a while, they went into that already. Then they started bringing in other fashion products, and they started the whole series of what they call a modest fashion wear, which is Muslimah or Muslim kind of...
And this high-end modest fashion.
Yes, high-end modest fashion, right? You can think of Nilofa is also a very similar business. Yeah, but they got the most attention because they went into what we call the fundraising game. Yeah, so in the startup world, they raised a lot of fund from different players, and their most prominent investor is none other than Khazanah
and PNB.
Yep.
All right, so before we go into these losses that was reported, cumulated losses of 127 million before they closed down Fashion Valet. Maybe I can ask you, the kind of reaction that we've seen from the public has been very, very negative.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and this is across the board. Is Malays, non-Malays, entrepreneurs, non-entrepreneurs. Why do you think there was such a visceral kind of reaction towards this news?
I think because people feel that PNB and Khazanah, the money is from the public. So they feel like, why did you invest in a company that end up losing money? And from 47 million, by the time you sell it down, you only sell it for what?
3 million.
3 million. Yeah, which is almost a 90% loss. Yeah, so people were angry and they felt like there must be some sort of a hanky-panky going on.
I also think that there were many people, I think, that in some groups that I'm part of who are entrepreneurs who are saying that, look, I had to slave over my own brand. I had to run a lot of high risk in terms of running my own business. I never had this kind of, even golden handout, so to speak, from PNB or Khazanah, right? And I think there were also, reports or speculations rather to say that the owners of Fashion Valet, Vivi Yusof and her husband, paid themselves very well, partly from some of these, investors' proceeds and benefited personally, even though the business was running at a loss. So I think this also contributes to that kind of unhappiness among the general public.
That's right.
Yeah, but now the reaction is such that PMX has ordered the audit, and then, which I think is fine, we can go into that a little bit more. But MACC is getting involved now. So you mentioned, Peter, that you're a bit surprised and the reaction was you were taken aback. Can you explain why?
Number one, based on the surface of what we are looking at, unless there are things that I don't know, obviously, I don't think it's a CBT case. Right?
Okay, not a criminal breach of trust. Okay.
Yeah, it's not a criminal breach of trust, nothing
lah.
illegal. You can say that the governance wasn't very strong. You can say that, like, for example, a company is losing money yet they paid themselves a lot, stuff like that. It's just not good business. You just end up investing in a group of people who are not very good in running their business and choose to... The most you can say is that they choose to enrich themselves before they enrich a business, which means that they are not good business leaders. Now, a breach of trust or a MACC demanded case would be if they paid certain underground to secure contracts and in this case, secure a certain investment. Now, again, like I said, unless I do not know. I think PNB and Khazanah has a good, clean track record in that sense, and they are quite careful in selecting their kind of investment. Yes, they may make questionable decisions and not very great decisions sometimes, but that also includes Temasek, right? Who also invested in FTX, and such is investment as a business. You will end up investing in certain businesses that are not very good. You can say that there are also a factor, but most of those factors that end up influencing it are not an outright CBT case. Yep. You can say that. So I think that the audit is great, but I think the focus should be on creating policy surrounding a better way of evaluating investment.
Correct.
Rather than MACC kind of thing.
Yeah, so if let's say, the audit were to be done by the Jabatan Audit Negara, the National Auditor General's Office, they have to have the expertise and the abilities to, for example, go and look at the minutes of the investment committee for Khazanah and PNB, and to evaluate whether there was a proper discussion. So that would be part of the audit, or the kind of the audit that I think would be value added. Whether or not this can actually, surface in the public, we wait to see lah. Because PM asking for an audit is one thing. PM making the results of the audit known to the public is another lah. Because in the end, he may want to only have the audit to be revealed to members of the cabinet or himself, or some people that are in his office, for example. So you're absolutely right. We need to have that kind of greater transparency and rigor. which I think generally, by and large, Khazanah and PNB, they have decent track record. I think EPF has probably a more robust one. But moving ahead, this is from a institutional and also a policy perspective. Many of these GLICs have been asked by the Ministry of Finance through a program called Gear Up, GEARUP, to put more money, invest more money into the local ecosystem in selected sectors, including some VC/PE type funding, venture capital and private equity. Venture capital is more early stage, PE is more mature investment. And for these kinds of investments that involve, let's say, VC, PE, even some fund of funds, there will be a higher risk profile. And to me, it is actually not reasonable or not practical for you to ask every single fund to reveal every single investment and also the return on every single investment. Do you think that is reasonable?
Okay, to reveal what they invest in, I think fair request. Okay, fair request to want to know what PNB is investing in or Khazanah, their VC funds are investing in. I think that's fair. And when you're in the circle, you can't know already also, right?
And sometimes they will announce.
Yeah, they will announce, right? But I think people need to understand the nature of a VC investment or PE investment and then the early stages investment. The earlier the stage is, the more contrarian your thinking has to be.
And the more risky it will be.
That's right, right? So if let's say today, say Ken Ming were to start a business, right? He says it's a great business. It will only be highly profitable if 9 out of 10 of my friends say that it's not a good business and I think it's a good business and he made it. That's how an early stage.
Yeah, the contrarian view.
Yeah, it's a contrarian view, right?
The people who invested in Google.
Correct. So if you go and audit me for investing in the early stage, chances are I'm not going to pass the audit.
And also, maybe out of your 10 early stage investments, right, 9 will fail and then 1 will be the one that, earns you the money.
Yeah, it's a combination of instinct and everything. So it's hard to audit. Now, I think if you're talking about a series, say C or D onwards
more
kind
mature,
of thing, matured investment, then you are less contrarian. Then the audit makes sense here. I don't entirely disagree or agree, but I think it matters what stage are they going to want it to be.
So I think the mandate of the fund needs to be clear. Parameters of disclosure also needs to be clear.
That's right.
The area of investment also needs to be clear. So that at least when these parameters are clear, right, if anything that is not within that mandate, you can say, okay, this is not within my mandate, I don't want to invest.
Yes. So I have to say one thing as well. Some people are actually blaming Khazanah and PNB. I as a startup, right, I haven't taken any money for investment. Just to share with you guys my story, when I first thought about this whole thing, I actually went and shared with many people our idea, and I tried to get investment in the early days, but no one listened to me, and they feel that like,
you have to prove yourself first lah.
Yeah, right. And even when, sometimes you ask me to talk to certain people, so like say, hey, maybe you can talk to this guy. You also hear the feedback. It's what I want to say is that I think in the investment space and startup, there's one very important skill set is to be able to tell a story about your business to sell to investor. This is very different from telling your story to sell to your user. Two different skill sets. And unfortunately, my second skill set of telling investors story about my business is not that great lah. And I've met people who are very good in telling that story. And I can understand why when they present that to people like Khazanah or PNB, it makes sense. Because to know my business at an intimate level for you to have that conviction to invest requires you to really know me. But how big is the team?
Yeah.
Probably 5-10 people. And there's 1,000 business out there. You can't go and know them personally. So it will highly depend on their skill set in telling that story. And so naturally, Fashion Valet, you look at the composition of their people. The people that they work with are very experienced fundraiser. And they can sell that story so well. And let me just share with you all. I have told my business to people who are very good in telling that story. And when they reiterate the story about my business back to me, I feel like I want to buy my business off their hand.
They can sell your story better than you can.
Correct. So I'm not surprised that people like Khazanah or PNB or any investor per se, when they deal with someone like that, they will believe that story. And again, they're not lying because ultimately it comes down to the execution. And again, the one is too far down. So I don't think it's fair to go all the way to the extent to say that they are so much at fault. Yes, there could have been maybe a little bit more things that they could do.
From a governance perspective.
From a governance perspective, like maybe, which I do not know because it's not transparent on that process. There may be, but I don't think it's until that level of like as bad as what we talk lah.
Sure.
That's how I have to say lah.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about due diligence and due process among the investors, you brought out one example. Temasek invested in FTX, and then that turned out to be a disaster from an investment standpoint. But interestingly, I read a book by Michael Lewis called The Great Leap, where he basically followed SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried around, including some of his later days when FTX went bankrupt. So his viewpoint was that FTX and SBF was a very interesting proposition. There were a lot of poor governance within SBF, within FTX, that was caused by FBF's own personality issues and his own lack of process from a governance perspective, right? But Michael Lewis was rather agnostic in terms of thinking of whether Sam Bankman-Fried himself was guilty of criminal charges or CBT. And I read recent news about the recovery of assets of FTX. Ironically, they've managed to recover more than 100% of what was owed to the investors. Because the value of some of the crypto assets has gone up since then.
Yep.
It shows that some of that money, or a lot of that money, was still around in the ecosystem. It's just that SBF didn't know where to find it.
Documentation is bad, maybe.
I'm not saying that for Fashion Valet they will suddenly be able to recoup all those losses that they incurred, through different means. But the larger question here of trying to understand the investment landscape and also the parameters of many of these VC and PE funds, right, is important, so that we can discuss these things from a policy perspective in a more reasonable fashion.
Yeah. I think most of the people are not very happy also. It added fuel to the fire because of her lifestyle. So like you were mentioning, I think one of the things is that because Datin Vivi Yusof, she lives a very luxurious life. At one point, I remember she was selling her handbags because she suddenly said that, I don't think I need all these bags anymore. So she took a picture of a whole wardrobe, like literally the wall is bigger than this picture here, and then it's all bags, and all the bags are LVs, Hermes, all the big bags, right? All the expensive ones. And she's selling it like 5,000 ringgit, 2,000, all the different Chanels and all. I would estimate the whole shelf alone would have cost millions.
Millions,
Yeah. Now, so people naturally will relate it with the money from Khazanah and you living a luxurious lifestyle and duck and all these kind of things. My personal thought is when we are policy concerns. So the other day also I was at KWSP, one of the top under fund management, FMM, right? And someone from KWSP and SC was there as well. And I suggested this one thing because we were talking about like people not earning enough in Malaysia. One of the thoughts that came in my mind is that could we not have certain policies where certain governments, agency were to invest? They should invest in companies where one of the feature there, it should be that the founders or the C-level are not just enriching themselves, but this wealth should translate to the normal level stuff. So what do I mean by that? I don't think it's wrong when you are earning well.
Yeah, if you're profitable, then you give yourself good dividends.
It's fair like you give yourself good dividends, or you pay yourself high. Fair and fair. As a CEO, you are having a lot more burden. It's understanding that you pay yourself 50K, or something like that. It's fair. I don't think it's wrong, right? Okay. I don't think it's wrong. If I can pay myself that, I'll pay myself that also. But there could be certain governance in terms of it should be a ratio between an acceptable ratio between your company's profitability versus your pay. And number two, another measure should be the average pay. Like maybe a benchmark on how much more your salary
versus maybe the lower end staff are getting paid.
Yes, if you outperform, that amount should be paid under, let's say, a special bonus or maybe a dividend, right? So these kind of things to set it up as a policy, then the money, because ultimately I'm sure that Khazanah or PNB or anyone else, their main mandate will be to make the most money out of that investment, right? But there should be certain mandate that comes in as well and say that this should be able to translate to the overall wealth.
Yeah, so I get where you're
Yeah.
coming from. I think this is where the incentive structure comes into play.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to have sort of like a HR system and also compensation system that's consistent with the values that you talk
That's
about. Whereby, the skin in the game is such that you need to be profitable and you need to plow back some of the investment into the company. Right. So, it remains to be seen whether we can put in those structures in place, whether the PE and the VC ecosystem have those kinds of, frameworks. And I think I'll be interested to see what happens in the context of Jelawang Capital, which is the new Khazanah entity that was formed as a result of the merger between Penjana and also MACC. Right, it's a fund of fund systems. They have two programs looking at entrepreneurs in Malaysia and also on a regional perspective. It'll be interesting to see whether or not they respond to some of the issues that have been raised as a result of this Fashion Valet investment. I think, like I said, you need to be clear about your mandate. You need to be, necessarily transparent, but in a way that will not expose you to negative publicity that you can't control. So, we'll see what happens, and I'm sure that there'll be more opportunities to talk about PE and also VC investment. Maybe we'll get a friend of ours to come and talk about this.
That'll be a good one. Last question. She also issued a statement of apology. So how will you respond to that?
Kita ambil maklum. We take note. Yeah, and we'll see what happens after this.
All right.
Be right back with the fourth and final segment of this episode. Welcome back to the final segment of this Are We OK podcast, and we want to focus our attention on the second 5G spectrum, where last weekend, a bit surreptitious because the statement was issued, I think, on a Saturday, that the second network had been awarded to UMobile. This statement was made by MCMC with certain conditions, and the conditions of the rollout of the second 5G network were not made public. Just that MCMC said UMobile is open or can work with other players to do the second 5G rollout, and at the same time, the foreign shareholding of UMobile would be diluted to 20%. Because right now, their largest single shareholder is actually Singtel from Singapore with, I think, about 48% share. And then there are other shareholders, including member of the royal family, Johor, and also, a couple of people associated with the Berjaya ecosystem, right, including Vincent Tan. So, of course, I've been following this issue very closely. And I think, when this announcement was made, I was quite surprised. I will issue a press statement later this week. Hopefully, when this episode is out, the press statement will also be out, asking a bunch of questions to MCMC, and I'll highlight a few questions later. But before I go into that, this is an area that I think we've been talking about before.
Yep.
So, any questions that you would want to ask MCMC in this context?
I think for me, I have to first state this. I'm not a 5G expert, right? So it's definitely not.
Neither am I. Yeah.
So don't know too much about it. But definitely my first question would be, why UMobile? And number two, I feel that the information provided on why they granted to UMobile is not sufficient. There's also the question about technicalities in terms of like, what are the kind of technical abilities and other kind of things that make UMobile a suitable candidate. Yeah, so that will be some of those questions that I have.
Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach on this one. Rather than to maybe start off on a more policy-oriented approach, I think a little bit, sing it a bit, right? Throw out some speculative thoughts. UMobile is actually one of the smaller mobile players out of the four that are still in the market. Celcom DG and Maxis are the two largest ones. Yes is, I think around the same as UMobile. Telecom has a little bit of a presence, but not much. So the understanding or the speculation was always either Maxis or Celcom would get it. In fact, RHB Bank issued a report hinting or speculating that quite likely Maxis will get it. So if I think a bit sing it, right? The effects of such an announcement, including the fact that UMobile can work with others to roll out the second 5G network, and it has to dilute its foreign shareholdings down to 20%, shows me that this announcement directly benefits certain shareholders in UMobile because you are able to sell off some of your shares at a higher valuation because of the 5G contract. So that's one. There will be others that will also think like that lah. Second thing is, again nakal a bit lah, would be whether or not this is a way to extract value from the shareholders of, let's say, Maxis, who is the biggest player and who has been probably the most aggressive in wanting to pursue its own second 5G network, right? So that one also a bit nakal. And then the third thing, which hasn't really been brought up in public as far as I can see, is that this announcement comes on the eve of PMX going to China later this week, going to Shanghai to attend the China International Import Expo, where he will meet Premier Li Qiang, whom he had met when Premier Li Qiang came to Malaysia for the 50th anniversary celebration. And PMX will also be visiting Beijing, where he'll have a meeting with President Xi. And, I read the press report, he'll also be visiting the Huawei Experience Center, right? So is this announcement, done in a way to, again, nakal a bit lah, to coincide with Prime Minister's visit to China, right? To say that the second network has been awarded, and although it's not announced yet who will be the technology or the equipment vendor, but likely the signs are pointing that it will be, maybe Huawei. I think lesser chance of ZTE coming into the picture. So those are some of the more naughtier thoughts that I have. Any reactions to that?
Not much, man. Like, for me, because somehow Huawei is already the top 5G provider in terms of equipment.
Yes.
So for me, it's kind of like
more or less.
Yeah, more or less that.
correct.
If this is really to display that, then my question is that what are other motives? Now, I would question. Singapore has always been shown as the proxy of US.
Yeah, more aligned to those interests. Yes.
Yeah, more aligned to those interests. Then could it be you're also sending a signal, or to maybe not to discredit the other side, but to please the other side even more, right? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. So to respond to that view, I would say that from a sort of like credibility standpoint, if let's say PM did want to get Huawei into the ecosystem, and there are legitimate reasons for that point of view, because Huawei has excellent technology.
Yeah.
And it's got a 5G deployment experience, including on the enterprise side in China, in different industries that could be successfully used in the Malaysian ecosystem. But why not, do a better beauty contest, reveal the conditions, and the specs for the initial tender exercise, and later on, and then now when explain why why UMobile got it, as opposed to Maxis. Because to me, if let's say you had wanted Huawei to come into the ecosystem, it would have been much better for the award to go to a credible partner like Celcom or Maxis that has greater financial strength and also greater network capabilities. And they still could have invited either Huawei or even ZTE to come into the ecosystem. And that will still be consistent with your policy of wanting to balance between East and West.
Yeah. So
right?
That's the question, why UMobile?
Correct. So it's interesting to take note of the reaction for Celcom, DG, as well as Maxis. Maxis says they are going to seek an appointment with MCMC to find out why they didn't get the bid. Right?
They're also clueless, huh?
Yeah. And then Celcom DG made a statement. They said they are exploring different options. Right? So it'll be interesting to see, and I will include these questions in my list of questions to MCMC.
Maybe can you explain to the audience, right? What's the financial benefit or the business benefit of owning this 5G network? And when they say that because UMobile can work with other players, what does that mean in this industry?
Yeah, so the benefit of having your own 5G network is that you control the spectrum. Spectrum is like a goal in the telco ecosystem. And what both Celcom DG and also Maxis are not happy about is that the initial allocation of spectrum for 5G was given to DNB, Digital National Berhad, which is controlled by government through the Ministry of Finance with shareholding from the major telco players except for telecom. So Maxis, yes, UMobile, and also Celcom DG has a stake in DNB, but the government holds the golden share. These telcos would want to have their own 5G spectrum and the ability to control how that network is going to be rolled out. And whoever controls the second network or is awarded the second network can have its cake and eat it. Meaning, they are still subscribers to the DNB 5G network. Their customers still can have access to that 5G ecosystem. At the same time, I can own a second 5G network and I can deploy my resources to, let's say, the places where there's highest traffic or potential traffic for 5G. Meaning, I don't invest in the rural areas. I focus mainly on the urban areas where it's more profitable. And then when the time comes, I can exit from the first shareholder agreement from DNB, and then I slowly port my customers to my own 5G network. There are a lot of other implications that needs to be answered by MCMC if, let's say, this process were to be undertaken. Because if that happens, then this second network operator will not be obligated to pay DNB for the access to their existing 5G network, which means the funds that DNB will get will be less, and there may be a financial implication on the Ministry of Finance, because ultimately they are the ones who are backing DNB. If DNB has a shortfall in terms of fund to go and pay the people that they borrowed money from, the banks that they borrowed money from, to roll out the 5G network, ultimately MOF will have to absorb the cost. Right? So all these are part and parcel of the calculation. And at the end of the day, the government has said that DNB will also be privatized and put into private hands. So to me, this brings about a very interesting scenario, possible scenario. Because on UMobile's perspective, and I'm speculating here, what they would want to do is, now that I've gotten the second 5G network and I've been asked to pare down my holdings, foreign shareholdings to 20%, I'm waiting for Celcom DG or Maxis to make an offer. Take me over, buy me over, some of these shareholders can cash out, and then the financial burden and the strategic responsibility of rolling out the second 5G network is by the partner that UMobile is working with, or the partner that buys over UMobile. So the major shareholders or the shareholders themselves don't really have to think about or fork out additional capital costs for 5G infrastructure rollout. So you're basically durian rento lah. You get the license, you can sell it off, you cash out, somebody else does the work for you. But what happens, and again, I'm really speculating here, right? What happens if, let's say, Maxis and Celcom DG come together and say, we don't agree with this way of doing things. I'm quite comfortable with the DNB structure right now. Maybe we ask for additional 5G spectrum to be allocated to DNB and also to the second network, but maybe more so for DNB first, because that's where the spectrum is getting a little bit crowded. My 5G service also on Celcom DG and also on Yes has dropped significantly as more people get onto the 5G network. Then you let UMobile carry on. You give them the responsibility of rolling out the 5G network and then see how they suffer. Right? That could be a possibility as well. Right? Because you didn't give it to me, You didn't give it to Maxis, you didn't give it to Celcom DG. I'm not going to be quote-unquote extorted or blackmailed into buying you over. It's okay lah. You have it, you go lah. You try to execute it lah. And that's when I think it's important for public policy, for policy makers, including MPs, both from the backbench and also the opposition leaders, to ask MCMC, what was the offer that UMobile made that made it so compelling for you to award it to them? What is their timeline in terms of rolling out the 5G network? And if, let's say, they are really capable of doing that, how come you say they are allowed to partner with others? Right? If they are allowed to partner with others, it shows that there are certain gaps in their business plan. Because I'm very sure that for Celcom DG and for Maxis, they can go on it on their own. And they would have put in a bid whereby they can stand on their own. So all these questions, I think, are questions that not only the telco players are asking. I think many analysts would ask, people, interested parties in the public would ask. Hopefully some MPs will bring this up during their budget debate, and I hope that the Minister of Communications can answer these questions on behalf of MCMC.
Can I just paraphrase this whole thing, right, in a more
Layman way.
Yes. And then you check whether the understanding correct or not.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yes.
We use something that's more familiar to us, like airspace, traveling. Okay? So it is kind of like today we have an airport. Okay? But there's many different airline carriers. So usually airline carriers don't run the airport. But in this case, we get an airline carrier, say MACC, to run the airport as well.
Or be a part of the shareholder.
To be a part of a shareholder of
and Asia is there as well.
Of the airport as well, right? Now, and why as a MACC I want to run the airport there is because then I get better rates. I get the priority to choose which gate I want.
Which landing slot.
Slot, or I get to choose all the golden hours and everything. I basically get to distribute to myself first, then the rest only I play with y'all. Right? Whatever I cannot sell, I sell to you. Okay, now, so whoever owns this as the runner will be a strategic benefit to own business and at the same time making something out of it. I'm not exactly technically, but yeah, that's the general concept.
Okay, go on.
So now the question is, out of the different the airline carriers that's being chosen, this is, say, Batik Air, something that is relatively new, relatively unsure, although the main owner behind, one of the owner behind is actually MACC, right? Or something like that, something bigger, like Firefly, let's say, right? But again, it is still not the...
Okay, so I know where you're going. I will use this example and then explain it back to you and also to the audience. So imagine, let's say, you have one airport ecosystem whereby you have to operate the cash cow in KLIA. Just KLIA, not KLIA 2. KLIA only, there's one airport in Klang Valley. And then, you also own and operate some some profitable but not the cash cow airports like maybe Penang and let's say Kuching and Kota Kinabalu. But you also have the social obligation of maintaining and also operating airports in not so profitable areas. Kota Baru, Terengganu, Kuantan, Ipoh and all that. So that would be sort of like the DNB ecosystem, right? They not only have to roll out 5G to the urban areas, but also to the not so urban areas. And then your aircraft operators are all in KLIA 1 and also the other smaller airports . Then another player comes in. Let's say Batik Air . And you award them KLIA 2. Right? And then you tell them, okay, you can run KLIA 2. You build it at your own time and speed. You may not be under any obligation to service airports that are in the rural areas. Right? And then you may want to partner somebody else for the building and operation of the second airport. So if let's say I'm Batik Air, okay, fair, I get it. And then I will talk to AirAsia. Hey, you want to come in or not? Buy a majority stake in me, and then you come out with the capital cost to build KLIA 2 and to operate it.
Okay. So that's
something like that .
Understandable for laymen.
Yep. So then the question would be, why did you give it to Batik Air? And then why do you allow Batik Air to again have additional partners if let's say they are capable of building and operating KLIA 2? And then what would be the impact on KLIA 1? What is your obligation in terms of servicing rural airports? Right? All these things are not answered. MCMC just issued one page statement in English and Malay and expect all of the questions that industry people have and also other interested members of the public have. And what actually pains me is that there was greater transparency in the awarding of the DNB contract to, in the bidding and the eventual awarding of the DNB contract to Ericsson compared to the current process. And many people criticize the DNB contract as one that was not transparent. Right? So I think this is sort of like regressive from a policy perspective, from a transparency perspective.
Right.
And I think these are the questions that need to be asked to the policy makers, including the Minister of Communications, who was one of those people who was very, very strident in questioning the lack of transparency on the part of DNB's 5G contract.
Yep.
Right? So watch this space, and hopefully my statement can be issued later this week and provoke more conversations as a result. So any final thoughts, any final issues that you want to talk about, before we leave?
No, nothing. Just that. Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty exciting week. We're gonna see some follow up on Najib's case side, and gonna see what's the result there, and then also waiting to see what's the response from our public when it comes to this DNB, this 5G network case.
That's correct. A lot more news to follow up on, and hopefully, maybe not this month, but next month, I'm hoping to bring in an expert to talk about Malaysia's application to join BRICS. Because of recent interest, there's I think more than 10 countries, new applicants to join BRICS, of which Malaysia is one of the 4 countries in Southeast Asia, the others being Vietnam, Thailand, as well as Indonesia, that have applied to join BRICS. So get somebody who is familiar in this area. And I think some of the comments after the episode with Professor Wong Chin Huat on institutional and electoral reform really shows that some of you, especially those who bothered to go through the entire episode, really benefited from that kind of discussion. So it may be a niche area, but I think it's good to put on record, put it in terms of our podcast portfolio, so that people can refer to it later on when they have questions about these important policy issues.
Yep, that's right.
So thanks for all your support. Remember to hit the subscribe button so that we can notify you of new episodes. See you next week.